They didn't just burn a building. They tried to erase a life. One quiet night, while winter crept closer and survival depended on careful preparation, a fire tore through everything I had built. Feed meant to carry my animals through the cold was reduced to ash. Years of work vanished before sunrise. And the people responsible didn't hide. They stood in the smoke afterward, calm and polished, and called it enforcement. What they didn't know was that destruction leaves patterns. Ash tells stories. Paper trails whisper. And sometimes the smallest overlooked detail becomes the spark that burns an entire lie to the ground. What began as a single act of cruelty would unravel a web of power, greed, and corruption hiding behind polite smiles and neatly written rules. This is a story about standing alone when everyone wants you silent, about watching neighbors turn away, and about choosing to fight anyway. Because when someone decides you are inconvenient, they will try to make you disappear unless you make the truth impossible to ignore. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to HOA Stories and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The smell woke me before the sun. Burned grain, scorched hay, and something sharp and chemical that did not belong on my land. I stood in the doorway of my farmhouse, boots half-laced, staring at a space that should not have been empty. My storage barn was gone. Where corrugated metal walls once stood, there was only twisted steel collapsed inward like a crushed can. The ground was blackened, still warm in places, ash clinging to my boots as I stepped closer. 200 hay bales. Dozens of feed bags. Equipment I had saved for years to buy. 4 months of preparation for winter, erased in a single night. This was not an accident. I knew that before my mind finished counting the losses. The fire had started on the far side of the barn, away from my house, where flames would stay hidden longest. Whoever did this waited. They watched. They knew when I went back inside earlier that night, after hearing a noise and seeing nothing in the dark. They chose the moment carefully. I forced myself not to grieve yet. Grief could come later. First, I needed to understand. 3 weeks earlier, a letter had arrived from the Homeowners Association. Bright white paper, gold embossed logo. One page informing me that my storage barn violated community aesthetic standards. It was inconsistent with neighborhood appearance, even though my property sat at the edge of the development, hundreds of feet from the nearest house, zoned for agricultural use long before the subdivision existed. I had called the number listed and reached the HOA president, a woman named Carol Whitman. Her voice was smooth, cool, and utterly unmoved. Rules were rules, she said. Compliance was expected within 30 days. I never got 30 days. Kneeling near the foundation, I noticed something caught beneath a fallen beam, a scrap of black synthetic fabric, melted but recognizable. Heavy-duty, industrial. Not mine. I worked in leather gloves, always had. I slipped the fabric into a plastic bag without thinking. The habit automatic from years before this life, when evidence mattered and details saved lives. As I stood, my hand brushed the shotgun leaning against the porch rail. Mounted to its barrel was a small trail camera I had installed months earlier to monitor predators near my livestock. Motion activated. Infrared capable. I had forgotten about it completely in the shock, and then my heart started to pound. The camera had been running that night. Before I could move, gravel crunched behind me. A white SUV bearing the HOA logo rolled up the drive and stopped just past the property marker. Carol Whitman stepped out, dressed impeccably for a morning that had barely begun. She surveyed the wreckage with the detached curiosity of someone inspecting a problem already solved. "What a terrible accident," she said lightly. "Perhaps this is a sign that agricultural operations are not suited for our community. The board would be happy to discuss relocation assistance." Her smile never reached her eyes. A week later, I walked into the HOA office and formally requested an investigation. According to their own bylaws, the association handled community security issues. Arson, I argued, endangered everyone. Carol barely glanced at the paperwork before sliding it back toward me. File an insurance claim, she said. This is a personal matter. When I returned home, 3 violation notices waited in my mailbox. Fence height, odor complaints, noise disturbances, all dated weeks earlier. All delivered now. Fines totaling thousands, payment due in days. They were building something around me, a paper cage. That night, I read every page of the HOA rules I had once trusted someone else to summarize. Buried clauses gave the board sweeping authority. Emergency hearings, accelerating fines, liens, foreclosure. It was a machine designed to crush anyone labeled a problem. I stopped reading HOA documents and started reading state law instead. That was when everything shifted. The Right to Farm Act protected agricultural operations on land like mine. Odor complaints, equipment noise, even the barn itself. None of it should have applied. The violations were not just unfair, they were illegal. I requested a hearing. The response came 2 days later, emergency session, 48 hours notice. While preparing, I searched county records and found something I had never been meant to see. A development proposal filed months earlier for a luxury resort. The map showed my 15 acres marked in bright yellow, future expansion. No one had ever asked me to sell. The phone rang that night. Carol Whitman again. She casually mentioned an alert from the HOA's monitoring service, asked whether my own cameras had recorded anything unusual the night of the fire. I lied. Just wildlife cameras, I said. Nothing near the barn. There was a pause, short but telling. Insurance denied my claim days later, citing suspicious timing. Rumors followed fast, whispers at the hardware store. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Someone had planted the idea that I burned my own barn. When I finally checked the trail camera footage, my hand shook. Most clips showed deer and raccoons. Then, one stopped my breath, 2 figures. Near the barn, carrying containers, pouring liquid along the foundation. The faces were unclear, but the movements were not. I watched it again and again. This was no accident, and it was no random vandal. They had burned my livelihood to force me out, and they had no idea how badly they had underestimated what survives fire. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, replaying the footage until the sun crept through the window and turned the ash outside a dull gray. Every time the figures appeared on the screen, my chest tightened. One tall and restless, constantly glancing toward the house. The other shorter, controlled, moving with purpose. The way she gestured, the way she never hesitated, sent a chill through me. I had seen that posture before. Calm, certain, untouchable. It was the same posture Carol Whitman wore every time she spoke to me, like I was already defeated. I copied the footage 3 times. One on a flash drive I hid in the truck, one encrypted and emailed to myself. One saved on the laptop. I was not going to lose this. The next morning, another notice arrived. This one informed me that interest had begun accruing on my unpaid fines. The amount had grown overnight. I laughed when I saw it, a short, hollow sound that surprised me. They were moving fast now, too fast. Predators rush when they think prey is trapped. I called the county fire department and asked for an inspection. The man on the phone, a captain named Michael Turner, sounded tired. He told me it would be several weeks unless there was evidence of arson. I told him there was. He paused, then asked me to explain. When he arrived later that afternoon, he walked the burn site slowly, methodical, and quiet. I showed him the fabric scrap. I explained the burn pattern. I did not show him the footage yet. I wanted him to tell me what he saw before I told him what I knew. This fire was set, he said finally. Accelerant poured low, ignited fast. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. I showed him the video. His expression changed instantly. Professional distance dropped away, replaced by something sharper. He asked for a copy and told me he would escalate the case. When he left, I felt something I had not felt since the fire. Momentum. That feeling did not last long. The Homeowners Association filed a lien against my property before the end of the week. Not threatened. Filed. The letter from my bank came in a stiff envelope that required a signature, as if formality made the blow gentler. The amount had climbed again, swollen by fees and penalties, dated weeks before I had even seen the notices. Foreclosure was no longer a threat. It was a timeline. Neighbors began avoiding me openly. A woman who had bought eggs for me for years crossed the street when she saw me walking toward the mailbox. A man at the gas station muttered something about insurance scams under his breath. Carol had not accused me publicly. She did not need to. She had simply expressed concern in the right ears. I filed a formal request for HOA financial records, citing state law. They responded late and incompletely. Blurred copies. Missing pages. But buried in the mess was a detail that made my hands go cold. Quarterly payments to a consulting firm called Whitman & Associates, tens of thousands of dollars each year. The business registry confirmed it. Carol Whitman owned it. So did the HOA vice president, a man named Mark Reynolds. The firm had no clients other than the association they controlled. This was not enforcement. This was a business. I cross-referenced dates and felt my stomach drop. The consulting firm was formed shortly after a development company submitted plans to the county. The same development that marked my land for expansion. Payments began 1 month later. They were not trying to clean up the neighborhood. They were clearing obstacles. The emergency hearing arrived quickly, held on a weekday afternoon when most residents were at work. 5 board members sat behind a folding table like judges who already knew the verdict. Carol sat in the center, hands folded, composed as ever. She opened with the total amount I owed, which had grown again. She mentioned my denied insurance claim. Then she slid a paper toward me. An offer. The development company was willing to purchase my land at what she called a fair price. The number was less than half its value, less than the cost of what I had already lost. "This resolves everything," she said. "You walk away clean." I looked at her and saw it clearly then. She did not see me as a person. I was a delay, a problem to be processed. "I decline," I said. Her smile tightened. "Then we proceed." Winter arrived early. The frost came hard and fast, and without the barn, I could not protect all my animals. I sold most of them at auction, loading trailers with goats I had raised from birth and chickens that had paid my bills for years. I kept just enough to maintain agricultural status under the law. It felt like amputating a limb to save the body. The money barely made a dent in the lien, but it bought me time. Time to dig. I contacted a former forensic analyst named Paul Harris, recommended through a veterans group. I told him about the trail camera footage. He agreed to try to recover more detail. While he worked, I kept researching. Public records, zoning meetings, financial disclosures. Patterns emerged. Other properties. Other owners pushed out quietly. Same violations. Same pressure. Same buyer appearing later. I was not the first. The annual HOA meeting arrived in early winter. Carol scheduled my violation review for the very end of the agenda. I understood why. People are tired by then, eager to leave. I sat in the back and watched frustration ripple through the room as residents questioned rising fees and unanswered complaints. Carol deflected smoothly, but I saw cracks forming. When my item was called, she invited me to speak. I asked 3 questions. Why was the HOA paying tens of thousands to a consulting firm owned by its own president? Why were pages missing from meeting minutes where rules had been expanded? Why did county records show my land earmarked for development when I had never been contacted? The room stirred. Carol moved to shut it down. Then a woman stood up. Her name was Linda Harris. She lived near the entrance to my property. She said she had been awake the night of the fire, that she had seen a dark SUV parked near my land around 2 in the morning, that it had driven away without headlights, that it matched the vehicle Mark Reynolds drove to every meeting, including the broken taillight she had noticed more than once. Mark went pale. Carol dismissed her, attacked her eyesight, her certainty. But it was too late. Questions erupted. Demands for records. Calls for an audit. Carol adjourned the meeting abruptly and left with Mark at her side, her composure finally slipping. My phone buzzed before I reached the door. A message from Paul. Recovered footage. Faces partially identifiable. Call immediately. The enhanced video showed what the original could not. Body shapes. Gait, hair pulled back tight, glowing pale under infrared. The way she turned toward the camera for a fraction of a second. Carol Whitman. Another frame showed something falling from Mark's pocket near the barn, an access card. I went back to the burn site with a borrowed metal detector. Near the foundation, exactly where the footage suggested, I found it. Heat warped but intact, the serial number still visible. The sheriff took custody of everything that night. News spread faster than I expected. Residents began comparing stories, violations that made no sense. Pressure to sell. Silence bought with fear. The district attorney announced an investigation days later. Mark tried to run. He did not get far. He took a deal. He told them everything, the payments, the meetings, the night of the fire. Carol's instructions, the belief that no one would ever prove it. The community held an emergency meeting without the board. A vote of no confidence passed overwhelmingly. Enforcement actions were frozen. The lien against my property stopped growing for the first time in months. Local media picked up the story, then regional, then national. When the footage was shown publicly, Carol stood and tried to justify herself. She talked about property values, about progress, about sacrifice. She did not deny it. The deputies were waiting. They took her out in handcuffs in front of the people she had controlled for years. I watched her leave and felt no triumph, only a quiet, steady sense that something heavy had finally been lifted. The barn was still gone. The losses were still real. But the lie that had nearly crushed me was burning now, exposed to air, unable to survive the truth. And for the first time since that night, I believed I might actually make it through what came next. The weeks after Carol Whitman's arrest felt unreal, like living inside the aftermath of a storm that had torn through everything and then vanished, leaving silence behind. The community that had once avoided my eyes now spoke my name openly. Some apologized. Some admitted they had believed the rumors. Others said nothing at all, but their posture had changed. Fear was gone. Curiosity had replaced it. The legal machinery moved faster than I expected. Once the district attorney had Mark Reynolds' cooperation and the enhanced footage, there was no slowing it down. Investigators combed through years of HOA records. Every missing page, every late-night system entry, every consulting payment traced back to Carol's shell company. What I had uncovered by accident turned out to be only the surface. More homeowners came forward, families who had moved away quietly, couples who had sold under pressure, convinced they were alone. Each story followed the same rhythm. Sudden violations, escalating fines, an offer to sell that appeared just in time. When those stories were laid side by side, the pattern was impossible to deny. The lien on my property was officially suspended, then removed entirely. The county declared the HOA's enforcement actions invalid pending full restructuring. For the first time since the fire, I slept through the night without waking to the weight in my chest. Civil lawsuits followed quickly. Meridian Development tried to distance itself, issued statements about rogue consultants and unfortunate misunderstandings. That defense collapsed when financial transfers were traced directly from the development group to Carroll's accounts. Their resort project was halted indefinitely. Investors fled. The land deals they had quietly assembled unraveled one by one. The insurance company reversed its decision after the fire marshal's final report confirmed arson. The check arrived in an envelope that felt heavier than paper should. It did not undo what was lost, but it made rebuilding possible. The community established a recovery fund using reclaimed HOA assets and voluntary contributions. I did not ask for it. I did not expect it. But when they voted unanimously to help rebuild my barn first, I had to step outside the meeting room to breathe. Pride is a strange thing. It can make accepting help harder than surviving injustice. Spring came slowly that year. I rebuilt the barn with fire-resistant materials and proper safeguards. When the first delivery of hay arrived, I stood inside the new structure and ran my hand along the wall, grounding myself in something solid again. Life does not reset after trauma. It continues, carrying scars forward. Carol Whitman's trial lasted longer than most people expected. Her defense argued intention, claimed she believed she was acting for the good of the community, that property values justified extreme measures. The jury did not agree. When the verdict came back guilty on every count, the courtroom was silent. No gasps. No cheers. Just the quiet finality of accountability. She was sentenced to 18 years. Mark Reynolds received less, bound by his cooperation agreement. Meridian Development settled with affected families to avoid prolonged litigation. The sums were large enough to make headlines, but money was not what stayed with me. What stayed with me was the lesson. Power does not always wear a uniform or carry a badge. Sometimes it wears pearls and smiles. Sometimes it hides behind bylaws and committees and polite language about community standards. Abuse thrives where people assume someone else is watching. I mounted the shotgun above the barn entrance after rebuilding, the trail camera still attached. Visitors sometimes ask why it is there. I tell them it is not a weapon. It is a reminder, proof that truth can survive heat, pressure, and fear. The community changed after that. Board meetings became transparent. Financials were posted publicly. Questions were encouraged. Linda Harris never missed a meeting again, her notebook always open. Walter Briggs became president by unanimous vote and insisted on independent audits every year. The HOA became what it was always supposed to be. As for me, I returned to my routine slowly. New livestock. Early mornings. Fences repaired one post at a time. Healing is not dramatic. It is repetitive. It is choosing to continue. Sometimes, late in the evening, I walk past the spot where the old barn once stood. The ground is healed, but I remember standing there in the ashes, thinking everything was over. I remember how close I came to believing the lie that fighting back was pointless. If there's one thing the story proves, it is this: systems fail when people stop questioning them. But they collapse entirely when the truth is recorded, preserved, and shared. They burn my barn to silence me. Instead, they expose themselves. And if you are watching this because you feel powerless against an HOA, against a board, against a system that tells you compliance matters more than justice, remember this story. Evidence matters. Persistence matters. Speaking up matters, even when your voice shakes. If this story resonated with you, support others who are still fighting. Like the video, subscribe to HOA Stories, and share your experience in the comments. Your voice could be the one that helps someone else realize they are not alone.